Good morning. I'm going to analyse a game from the first American Chess Congress in 1857 from Paul Morphy against James Thomson. It was his first game in a real tournament. It was the first real tournament in America, and it was designed to find out who was the best player in America. Morphy believed he was, but didn't know there were other good players in America at the time. And this is his first game, and maybe we could say it was a little bit more cautious than usual by Morphy, but let's see what happened. Morphy played e4 as ever. I think he almost always played e4. c5, Sicilian. Knight f3, probably the best. And very direct d4. No gambit. The pawn is taken, and it's taken back. a6, the Taimanov variation. I think in chessgames.com this is given as the Paulson variation. This game, I'm not sure why, but this is definitely what we would now call a Taimanov variation with the e6. Okay, so white has control of the e4 square and the d5 square, and black has pressure on the d4 square and control of the e5 square, and is ready possibly to play pawn to d5 to contest the centre a little bit more. Both have one piece developed, so far so good for both players. Bishop to d3. Yeah, he wants to, if the knight gets captured, he wants to be able to recapture with his bishop to keep his piece in the centre. Maybe not most common move today. Bishop comes to e7. This is a very cautious move, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's a fine move. The knight develops, and the pawn develops. Having played already, bishop to e7. This pawn here is a bit strange. Possibly he's thinking that he might want to play bishop here and swap the bishops off and get his queen in a good position. Yeah, reasonable idea, but the problem with that is that straight away f4 comes and chases the bishop back, so I don't really see the point in h6. With the bishop there, white is not going to be playing bishop to g5, and the knight can't get there for a couple of moves anyway, so it looks a bit pointless to me to play h6. And the bishop comes out again. This isn't how it would normally be done, because I think both knight here to e5 attacking the bishop and knight here to b4 attacking the bishop could be strong, and yeah, could be a chance for black to get the two bishops. But d5, perfectly acceptable move. And now the knight is pinned. Yeah. So that there isn't any chance of overwhelming the knight on d4. There wasn't much chance anyway, and the pin is broken immediately. Pawn gets taken and it recaptured. And in that way, he's given away a pawn. He's now playing with 5 pawns against 6. The knight comes to f6, and Morphy's glad to trade off, and he plays c3, so that again he's got the idea of eventually recapturing on with a piece on e5, d4. Both sides castle, queen comes to c7. Yeah, so black has actually managed to be finished with development and ready for the opening, a move ahead of Morphy. But Morphy now plays very actively. The queen trading everything on c6 at least leaves black with a much weaker pawn structure. With bishops of the same colour and that weakened pawn structure, that would definitely be advantageous to Morphy here. The rook comes to the open file. Of course, that's great. White brings his rook to the open file. d4, yeah, it's e4, so it's a good move. It's a good move. He's pinning the knight to the queen and maybe threatening some kind of overwhelm. but he takes the knight, so that the knight can't be taken. The bishop takes, and the queen comes back and threatens the rook on e4. Obviously, he can't take it now because it's defended by the bishop, and even if he takes the bishop, black will take back with the queen, and the rook will still be defended. So, yeah. Bishop to e5, threat on the h pawn. Sorry. And the g pawn moves to take care of that threat. You know, I don't understand why he would take that. Maybe he's thinking he can get some kind of attack on the long diagonal with his bishop, but he's given up a good bishop for a okay knight. He had the two bishops, he doesn't anymore. And Morphy takes with the pawn, moving a pawn towards the centre and creating a passed pawn, of course. And now he's also threatening to play pawn to d5, and the bishop is pinned to the queen. So yeah, a good move all round. Queen comes to e7, but this doesn't stop the pawn from coming to d5. The queen gets attacked. Obviously, he can't take back because then Morphy will take the rook on e4. So he pins the rook, but yeah, I don't think it's so very effective because he takes the queen anyway. He takes back the queen. Does this mean he's given back a pawn? No, not actually, because he defends it with bishop to a3. Great. He could have played d6, but then we're in a very locked up opposite coloured bishop's position. We are in an opposite coloured bishop's position here. Okay, white has an extra pawn, but it will be difficult to win this. So let's see the technique. So Thompson plays b4, b5 with the threat of b4 squashing the bishop. So Morphy suggests a rook exchange first and forces a rook exchange. And now the rook comes to d2 to threaten the passed pawn. And now he makes good on his threat of coming to b5. So the bishop has to go to c5 to be free from the attack. And he doesn't play rook takes pawn, which I think probably was his best chance. So the rook gets threatened, then the bishop gets threatened, and the pawn gets taken. That's the point. Okay, you're going to take my bishop. I'm going to take yours, but I can take the pawn first. And so he takes the pawn first, and suddenly Morphy is 2 pawns ahead with a passed pawn on the 6th rank. This is getting serious for Thompson. And the king comes nearer to the centre and nearer to the furthest forward passed pawn. Very sensible. The rook attacks the pawn, and the rook defends the pawn. The king comes into the centre. The pawn gets taken, an exchange of prisoners. And does this mean that Morphy's going to lose a pawn? He could come to g2, g1 and defend both pawns, but he realises that if he goes to e3, then the black rook is completely out of play. And so the pawn makes a dash for it, keeps making a dash for it, and great. Tarrasch rule puts the rook behind the passed pawn. Now there's really nothing to stop it. Yeah, he can put the rook in the way, but it's not going to do him any good. What a great move. Because if, he puts the pawn where it can be taken, but if the pawn gets taken, the other pawn comes to a7 and then becomes unstoppable. So the king comes in. Again, he could have played e7 and gone for a more complicated swap off, but he plays b7 because it's the quickest, most direct way to victory. And now he plays a7, and yeah, one of those pawns is going to be getting through. He plays a check, the king moves and he takes the b pawn. But it doesn't make any difference. A new queen is born, lives a brief but beautiful life, and now the king gets the pawn, and it says, and white wins. I don't know if this means Thompson played on. If he did, well, there isn't really any point. There wouldn't be any point against a player even as of as low ability as myself. I'm gonna find a way to win this with the 2 extra pawns. I say 2 extra pawns even though it's level, because the pawn's on G7 and therefore the pawn on G8 or H6 are undefendable. Even if he pushes the pawn to G5, the king comes to G6 and the 2 pawns collapse, and 2 pawns, and the king is far away, not inside the queening square of either of the pawns. So it's a very trivial win. Yeah, so that was Paul Morphy's first experience of real tournament chess. And I think the rest of the week, possibly some of this next week, I'm going to be looking at Morphy's other games from the First American Congress. So, yeah, lots of Morphy goodness to look at in the next week or so. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share my videos. It helps me very much. Thanks. Bye.